About 5,000 of you on Twitch, 2,500 of you on YouTube. Sorry, chat hadn't given a shout out to all of you yet. Thanks for being with us. And okay, here we go. The first game is over. Wesley So on the board.
I don't know that, when I'm seeing moves that are slightly better than a guy who's definitely stronger than me, then I'm a little worried because he's supposed to see those moves. That was a technical end game. He might, and maybe his end game is weak as phase. I don't really know to be able to talk like that. I mean, the guy, like I said, he's a young man. He's 16 years old, but he is definitely way stronger than I am. But, we OGs, we know a little bit about the end games.
That's right.
If nothing,
We've been around the block.
We've been around the block. So we say, okay, this is how you're going to draw this one, young man. And the fact that he didn't play for that G5 idea concerns me because he's not going to beat Wesley tactically as far as I can tell. That's just not
interesting here. Nodirbek has played the Ruy Lopez. Let's back up real quick on the analysis board just because I was curious whether we would see one of his sort of specialties. He has a variation of the Scotch that he's played more than a few times in some of our Grand Prix. It actually normally with the Bishop C4 move order. We'll see if that appears later on. Here we have a Berlin offered, sort of a Berlin declined, right? White doesn't go for the main lines, every one of castles and all the big trades we see in the center.
Oh, please don't. Please don't.
And now we're in some traditional kind of anti-Berlin Spanish theory here.
This is the best White can get. The problem is the structure is not imbalanced enough. And that's a real challenge for White because Black can trade so easily. Look at the pawn structure. Black does have the issue with the double pawns, but we know these double pawns are just perfectly fine. And that pawn on C6 is guarding critical squares, D5 and B5. And the pawn on C7 is guarding critical squares as well. So these are healthy, happy pawns for defense. White has a 4 against 3 on the other side. But the more these pieces trade down, the less you're going to have any real edge. And look at this. Pawn takes, trying to imbalance the pawn structure. He knew that if he kept the position going the way it was, that there was no way he was going to get an edge. So he said, let's go. Let's go. Let's switch this pawn structure around. And he's looking for the move F5. Now, will Wesley himself play F5? Is that reasonable? Because
instead he tries to get the queens off the board. This almost looks a little bit like the dynamics you see in some of the mainline Petrovs these days with both sides castle on opposite sides, except a lot of minor pieces off the board. And if Black trades queens, probably doesn't have anything to worry about in regards to the attack.
No trades. No, thank you.
Yeah, I would keep him on the board. One or two squares.
I like Queen G3. What's wrong with Queen G3 threatening F5 and potentially F6? Wesley must have something planned against this.
Well, maybe then it's your F5 move. If
that
Queen
F5
G3,
move
maybe then
is
F5.
thematic to this pawn structure. So you've got to watch out. That knight on E6 will be an ox if a pawn sits on F5. And I think that's his biggest worry. He did play Queen G3, but I am concerned. And Wesley has played this move F5. It's on the board. This is usually a structure where Black can just sit. By the way, Black is threatening to take on E4 right now.
Yeah.
So F4 will become weak. And the main point is if you play E5, how do you ever, and I mean ever, drive the knight away from E6? Like ever. In the history of time, you will not get this knight off of the square. This is a super solid position. I think now the youngster is not too thrilled that he's going to try to keep the balance. He's played rook to E1. Might as well keep it sharp and hope that this works out for him.
Yeah, this move rook E1, I like he's maintaining the tension. He wants to keep it tricky, but I'm with you that Wesley, it's getting unbalanced where this could quickly become a position where White thought he was attacking and it turns around and in fact he's just positionally busted at the end.
Wesley's not even looking at the board. I mean, you saw Wesley kind of glance off and Wesley's chilling. Wesley's chilling. He's back to focusing on the screen, but this is not good. This is not look. If I had the white pieces, I'd be trying to bail. I would not be happy. I'd like for my pawn on F2 to be on G2, please. Would you do me a favor and fix my pawn structure? I mean, this is not looking good. He's at the trade-off. What to do now as Wesley's position is hyper solid. You know what the main problem is in this position? The knight on C3.
Yeah.
The knight on C3 is just.
White might have to play a move like 3, I mean, just to maintain the fact that at least I won't have the double pawns. No. Okay, another way to possibly do that if he says if you take, I wonder if White's intending you'll just take with the pawn to defend F4, and then you fix your double pawns. So
it's a defensive move. It's a reasonable move. Give him credit for keeping the game alive. What should Wesley do now? I got to say, I don't see anything to really amp up the pressure if I am Black. This last move looked very solid. to try to correct all that ails.
You have to be a little careful if you're Wesley, because one threat, if we bring up the analysis board, is actually to take f5, meaning you can't just sit on the position now. White will take, and then on the queen trade, take with the pawn. Okay, so Wesley indeed does decide to break the tension. The staring contest is over between the pawns.
And usually the person who loses the staring contest is the worst for it.
Yeah,
so
conceding. Yeah,
this is something that you want, because now look at White. White is thinking about multiple ways to take on the e4 square and which one actually does the do. I'm surprised he hasn't played queen takes, but he recognizes that the endgame is a potential bailout, even though he has this weak pawn on f4. I personally wouldn't want to see the endgame. It's my tendency as a player.
Yeah.
And queen takes on e4 played, keeping some dynamism. And now that once secure knight on e6, Danny, it's a little bit of an issue. It's a little bit of an issue.
It didn't become closed like we were talking about, so now Wesley has to deal with the obvious threat. I guess if you just head back to f8, the position is still pretty close to equal and kind of the same dynamic. Will White get counterplay with the queens on the board, or will he miss up and end up in just a lost endgame?
I was going to say, he does not want to go back to f8. That is not what he wanted to do. He wanted to justify his knight staying active. And so he's put his knight on a great square here. He might even drop it back to f5 as needed. But he had to really check the danger associated with rook to d1. That was the key, whether or not rook d1 was something special. He's decided that it wasn't, that it was okay. The pin was not going to hurt him.
I wonder if rook d1 was better. I mean, that would have been, at least from a practical perspective, a very dangerous thing. So instead, Nodirbek offers the queen trade.
And this looks reasonable. This looks reasonable as well. Maybe you might have to play a boring queen d6. Again, and not a move you really want to play. And he's instead whoa! I would not have guessed ultra passivity.
Yeah,
is this what
Wesley
just happened?
Is at least right now the one fighting for the draw. But it's an interesting dynamic again, because if White's pressure fizzles, positionally White is still just dealing with some ugly ducklings over here. So the question is, does Nodirbek have an idea? I mean, is the knight coming in?
Knight e4, knight g5. I mean, what do you mean? This is very straightforward to try to put the knight to the e6 square. Knight e4 down. Knight can also end up on c5 in the right position.
Right.
The problem for him right now that he's considering is whether or not he might lose this pawn. See, the knight e4 is met by knight e2 check, and knight takes on f4. Right. This is the problem, right? So if he drops that, does he have enough play? And he's decided not to bother with that pawn, but in this position, he's sacking the h pawn for activity, because knight f3 check and then takes is playable. Oh, no, it's not. The problem is f3. The problem is f3 would have shut him down.
A lost
f3 would have been
there.
Was nasty. The knight would have been trapped. So he cannot. This is a nuance he found. He cannot go after it. But now king to e8 is indeed threatened. Here comes Wesley with king to e8, and that rook will have to back up. So he's played
the key point. Yeah, the knight guards g7. And another key point, we're so focused on the chess, is that Nodirbek, again, down on the clock big time, right? So regardless of the technique, you may not have enough time to convert here if you're White. You got to speed up.
He's in desperation mode now. All that time to try to figure out equality, and Wesley has now planted a knight on a hyper-secure square d6. You will never chase this knight off of this square. Knights like stable squares. That's it. That's it. Now Wesley can play around. He can bring his king up, move his rook over, start gang tackling your pawn on f4. Notice he just played that c5 move to get maximum security. He's shutting down all play on the queen side. I think a little bit too careful maybe. Scratch that. He's going to remove.
I love that idea. Yeah,
that
A4
side,
so
open
nice.
up the A file.
Wow.
And now the knight is just dancing and prancing.
Yeah,
look at that beautiful knight. He's going to
coming
crack
in, the
open
rook coming on the A file.
This is all black, people. Black. Again, what did I say about the endgame technique? You got to have it at this level. And we're seeing another endgame on the board. Wesley outplaying the youngster. And that knight on that square looks nasty. A direct threat of check. White, where is White's counterplay? He does not want to have to defend this position, but it looks like that's all he's going to be able to do. I like rook a3, forcing rook b2, followed by rook a1. Wesley liked rook a1 immediately. You're not even sure what Black's threatening, Danny. Black could be threatening anything. You're just
Black's
scared.
holding all the cards here, right? No, it's super. And now you could even trade and go after the h, but no, probably not. No, keep the rooks on the board.
I would like to see my king somewhere on
Yeah.
f6 before I
Right.
do anything else. Like,
If this king was a little closer, you probably would trade.
Mhm.
But probably we'll see something like rook e1 and just sit tight until this king improves itself one way or the other.
except Wesley's now calculating the problem associated with b4. b4, because of his last sequence, b4 will give a little bit of play to white as white opens up the game and tries to establish a weakness on the c5 square. You see, he didn't want to see that position, and that's why he played the way he did. But he calculated this, thinking that maybe he has something. But now that I'm looking at it, white just might have enough. Look at that. Timing.
Nice check, and now he's going to back up as soon as the king retreats and ask Wesley how he's going to win. But still, only 5 seconds. So all Wesley has to do is give him at least one problem to solve. And will he do it with the amount of time he has?
I'd play c6 right now if I were Wesley. Just
to
fake
sit
him out.
pretty. I like that move.
Just to make him wonder what's going on. Wesley has a lot of time on the clock. Wesley's looking for concrete moves, though. Knight f3 is also quite attractive. But that king b5, I don't want to see any of it. Well, Wesley have decided that it's worth going for. Again, this king b5 move concerns me, as white is now back in business. Wesley
I wonder if he'll just come right back here and then oh, okay, no, he's going to allow this idea of king b5. Here he goes.
Yeah, now c5 is a threat, and I'm not sure black is doing anything. That knight on g3 is doing yeoman's work.
Only 4 seconds, but Nodirbek
so.
is holding despite that. He's living off the increment here. And
these moves are not that hard. King d5, and here we go. f3.
That's a good move, h6, though. The knight's going to move, and there's king g5 prevented.
Whoa, but now white is looking for knight to e4. And knight to e4 is progress. Why not play it? Here he goes. He needs to make a move. Knight back, and now king e5. Oh, king e5 looks forced.
3
king
seconds,
e5.
but h5 is hanging. He'll give knight d5 check, and then what's the next move?
And this looks very much like danger suddenly because of the extra pawn, and he's just dancing around. Wesley, but only 15 seconds himself, though. Only has 15 seconds. He's got to figure this position out, and it's not easy at all. And here, white has dropped another pawn. You can't give up f4 in this position. But Wesley, with only 11 seconds, Wesley has to start running, and he can go for it because the knight will not be able to stop both pawns, the h pawn and the c pawn. And that pawn on f5 is not going anywhere because of the sack, knight check. And there goes Wesley, knowing full well that he can play knight e6 right now and stop the pawn from going. Oh, he stole